To the rest of the day's news now, a newly discovered so-called vampire system is offering a glimpse of what could befall our solar system in a few billion years. Australian astronomers uncovered the cosmic feeding frenzy while trawling through data from the now-defunct Kepler Space telescope. Joining me now live is the study co-author himself, as well as astrophysicist and cosmologist at ANU, Brad Tucker. Brad, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks.
So firstly, take us through this discovery. What is a vampire system?
So what we're talking about here is a system not too dissimilar to what might actually happen to our own solar system in the future. So we have a white dwarf, and a white dwarf is the remnant core of a sun-like star. So still most of the same mass and gravity, but quite small. And here, it actually got close to a brown dwarf. So we call brown dwarfs failed stars, so kind of like somewhere between a Jupiter and a sun. And the white dwarf's gravity literally started to suck off the atmosphere of this other star. So it's kind of like if we had a giant vacuum cleaner and started to pull off our own. And as it started to do this, it started to go through eruptions. So literally stealing stuff from another system and exploding that in space.
And how did you make this discovery?
So, as you said, we used the Kepler Space telescope, which is famous for finding planets around other stars. But because it takes an image of the sky every 30 minutes, you can look for short changes. And so these explosions happen even though the whole explosion lasted for about 30 days. The peak of it was only about 5 hours long in the beginning. So you take lots of quick images. Now, usually when we take these images from the ground, we only take them every couple days because of nighttime, daytime, weather, and those sorts of things. So we looked at all of the images it took, and instead of staring at the stars that Kepler was looking at for planets, led by my PhD student Ryan, we looked around those stars, kind of like your peripheral vision, to see anything that happened in the background, and this was the first one that we happened to find.
Well, congratulations on your research. Certainly a mammoth effort. Let's move on now. Donald Trump has unveiled the new logo for the US state's Spaceforce. It's had a bit of mixed reaction on social media. Take us through it.
Look, it definitely has. You know, we've talked a bit about Spaceforce now, and of course, like every other armed branch, it was going to have its own logo. Now, a lot of people have drawn similarities to the Star Trek logo itself, the International Federation of Planets. And so it kind of has an interesting throwback to different looks. And so, you know, some people have loved it. Some people said it was potentially a copycat of another thing, which they've said it isn't. But really just shows how different this is going to be from the other branches of the armed forces, but also how serious they are that, you know, they've had their own uniforms now, they have their own logos, and they're really starting to take operation of this sixth military branch. And we'll see really as this takes shape what it means for global space communications and global space interactions, especially on the international side.
Keeping in the US, the House Space Subcommittee has released the NASA appropriation bill. There are some big changes that were made. What were they?
So this has only come out in the past about 12 hours or so. And what they've talked about is the NASA budget for the next couple years. Now, most of it's fairly standard, except a few of the big changes are the de-emphasis on returning to the moon. We've heard a lot about the Artemis mission and going back to the moon. And in fact, Pence last year said they want to get to the moon in 2024. The House subcommittee has actually said they are not going to approve a 2024 landing, but would instead look at a 2028 landing, which is more akin to the timeline previously. They've also de-emphasized all the return to the moon and focusing really just on going to Mars. So it's a lot of bit of back and forth, and we've seen this in the past 20 years from the Bush administration's goals changing to the Obama administration's goals now changing to the Trump's administration goals. And in fact, this is what people in the community have been worried about, that NASA's goals of to the moon and Mars are really becoming so politicized that it will actually prevent the work from happening. So we'll see, because it still has to be approved by the whole House and met with the Senate bill, but it's a sign of what is happening to NASA, especially in these human exploration goals. So definitely something to watch forward to.
Absolutely. Now, Spacex has completed its last major test before flying astronauts to space on Sunday. How crucial of a milestone is this for Elon Musk's company?
So it is one of the few times blowing up a rocket was the goal. And this really, as you said, was to prove the final test, and that is if something goes wrong on a normal launch, the capsule can actually get away from the rocket. So we're seeing here the rocket exploding, and right before the capsule where the humans sit in, on top of it, was actually jettisoned away. This test is important. In 2018, December, the Soyuz capsule had a rocket malfunction. We saw the Soyuz capsule jettison away safely with the astronauts, land in Kazakhstan, and the rocket malfunctioned and was destroyed. So this is essentially the check to say if something goes wrong, will the humans survive it? Now, you can't prove it works until you essentially do it. So SpaceX had to blow up a rocket on purpose to prove it. It appears to have gone to plan. They're still analyzing the data on board to make sure the forces withstand were not lethal and that they were in the tolerance that they expected. Essentially, if this all looks like it does, we will see SpaceX launching astronauts probably in March or April this year.
Oh, that certainly sounds exciting, Brad. And just finally, we've got more details on the first space cookies, but I'm just very curious to know, has somebody tasted them yet?
So they still have not tasted it yet, but more importantly, I guess, well, I don't know, taste is important here, they've looked at the process to bake them, and what they found was that the baking time was much longer than expected in space. In fact, they had to keep changing the time of baking, so the first batch was a flop. They actually had to go all the way up to 130 minutes as opposed to the normal 25 minutes. And they also had to increase the temperature to about 165 degrees Celsius, about 15 degrees Celsius warmer, just to get it to bake. Now, why this is important, because if they are going to start manufacturing things in space and baking things in space, if things take 2.5 times as long, let's say your project takes a week to build, you don't want to have to take almost 3 weeks to build that. So this actually has big implications for the future of manufacturing and eating for those potential returns to the moon or to Mars. So definitely something to watch.
Absolutely, how fascinating, and hopefully one day they might be able to taste them. Brad Tucker, thank you so much. One day. Thank you for the update.